Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Muriel Bowser, the identitarian mayor of the District of Columbia.
Oh yeah, she's making a little news this morning.
This week, the announcement was made that BLM Plaza is being painted over.
Now, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser saying that the name of Black Lives Matter Plaza will be changed amid growing pressure from Republicans. The mayor making that announcement just moments ago, saying, quote, the mural inspired millions of people and helped our city through a very painful period. But now we can't afford to be distracted by meaningless congressional interference. There have been efforts in Congress to force the district to change Black Lives Matter Plaza or lose federal funding.
I think you strip the federal funding anyway. Yeah, go ahead and paper over that identitarian plaza, and we're going to look at the funding that D.C. has provided and what it does with it with a fine-tooth comb anyway. Should take that same approach to the identitarians in higher education. OpenTheBooks.com has recently released its 2025 State of the State Schools report. Mm-hmm. And you want to start, or you want to continue what Trump has started with executive orders, and that is rooting out taxpayer-funded racism. You better start with the state schools. U of I. U of I has more than 100 DEI staffers. Spent almost $7 million on pay for 112 employees with DEI-related roles that last year. That's the equivalent of tuition and fees for 400 in-state students. To the extent they still accept in-state students at U of I, as opposed to deferring to Chinese nationals. We'll get to that. Top of the DEI pyramid at U of I, the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, a woman named Nicole Suzanne Del Castillo, $420,000. The Vice Chancellor for DEI, $228,000.
Jeez.
The Associate Vice Chancellor for Access and Equity, what's the name there? Nizram Arain, $190,000. Wow. The Executive Associate Vice Chancellor for Diversity, because you need associates and executive associates and assistants to the Executive Associate. Executive Associate Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Gioconda Guerrera Perez, $187,000. Sonia Chambers, the Executive Director, Strategic Initiatives in Vice Chancellor for Diversity.
What?
Man, I tell you, the business cards alone are expensive. $169,000.
My goodness.
And
what do they do? Tell me 5 things you did last week.
They diversity is our strength, so they enhance diversity because diversity needs 112 people to act as its stewards. It doesn't occur naturally as part of the human condition. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just a government-created industry preying on our feelings. To launder our tax dollars, one has said.
The Women's Studies Department has become, quote, well-equipped to illustrate and investigate gender and other relations of power, such as sexuality, race, indigeneity, class, nationality, religion, and ability, as these form and inform discourses and practices in historical and contemporary arrangements.
Is that on a business card?
That's in a course description or a department description, and you wonder why the Women's Studies graduates have to find, a rich woman to marry if they want to live in Hinsdale. Gender and gaming, the politics of fashion, queer theory, fairy tales and gender formation, transnational sexualities.
Jeez.
The university spent $135,000 last year on organizations with a DEI purpose. So student organizations, in addition to the 112 DEI personnel. Also, they have all these seminars and symposia. University of Illinois, U of I, Champaign, has received $225 million from foreign sources over the last decade China, by far the largest, at $80 million to the university. In 2019, the university's business school announced Chinese enrollment was so high that it needed to buy insurance to protect against a sudden loss of Chinese students in the event of a breakdown in diplomatic relations between the countries. Land Grant University. This is abiding the mission, the deal of being a land grant university, state university? No, it's not. No, it's not. The U of I accepted $2.7 million from Saudi Arabian sources. The school has a Saudi Student Association that celebrates Saudi National Day each year on campus. Since 2020, the University of Illinois has received $3.4 billion in federal tax dollars. It's about $780 million a year. Most of it coming in the form of grants. Grants like $2.4 million from HHS to optimize an adaptive intervention that will increase rates of testing and adherence to New Jersey COVID-19 recommendations.
Oh, boy.
$650,000 from the National Science Foundation to bring together education researchers, high school teachers, research scientists, and community-based organizations as co-design teams to modify science curriculum materials to be justice and community-oriented. Marxist frivolities. $150,000 from the National Science Foundation for tracking and network analysis of the spread of misinformation regarding COVID-19. The reckoning that needs to come for all of the DEI and other Marxist frivolities that are being funded by the federal government through its various appendages to state schools, U of I just being one of many, many examples. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Stanley Ridgley, Associate Professor of Management at Drexel University, author of a new book, DEI Exposed, How the Biggest Con of the Century Almost Toppled Higher Education. Well, I don't think it's done yet. Stanley Ridgley, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's great to be here. Good to be with you and Amy. And I've really enjoyed your lead-in on that. You basically have described the DEI con in action.
Yeah, and so, I assume that this is not going, unbeknownst to the Doge folks, and we're going to, boy, if we thought we saw some hysterics when it came to funding USAID, wait till all of these professors and their cozy sinecures are jeopardized. All the grant funding that props up these bureaucracies at places like University of Illinois.
Yeah, well, sinecure is a great word that appears many times in my book DEI Exposed. How the biggest con of the century almost toppled higher education. You have really hit the nail on the head when you talk about these sinecures and how Doge is going to be coming for them at some point. The idea that there's a carte blanche entitlement to federal dollars and to student tuition, parents paying student tuition, to fund these enthusiasms, these trivial enthusiasms, Marxist-inspired enthusiasm. This entitlement is going to be coming to an end. The gravy train is pulling into its last station. And I think that we can be gratified at the new administration's activities in that regard. I certainly am. I'm kind of in the minority on the college campus, as you might imagine. But my colleagues are quite worried. Hand-wringing, et cetera, woe is me. What are we going to do? And I think that these are sort of refreshing change from what we've seen over, the last decade.
Well, could they keep their employees and just change their titles? Just to fake out the government?
Well, the answer to that question is, of course, they could try, but the administration's on to that. If you look at the letter that they sent out on February 14th that requires them to end their DEI programs, it says quite clearly it will not be acceptable for you to simply change the name, the title of a person, the name on the office door, the title of the program. You're going to have to get rid of the program. And I think that the Department of Justice, Office of Civil Rights, is on to this idea they're going to try to rebrand DEI into something like inclusive excellence. That's what they're going for now. Inclusive excellence.
Inclusive excellence. Yeah, it's very Orwellian. Right, yes. Merited diversity. Yeah, I got it. But the question, though, is how to go about this, right? Because I'm not anti-research institution or anti-science, but they use those descriptions to cover what they're really doing, which is practicing identity politics at taxpayer expense. So the question, I guess, comes down to, can these things be pared back with a scalpel while allowing the university to maybe have to reduce the size of its DEI office, but otherwise operate much in the same way it does right now? Or do you really need essentially a zeroing out of these grant fundings and is starting from scratch to just sort of reset the table and make sure that grants that are funded, contracts that are let, don't continue to propagate what I just described here from U of I?
Well, I think that the scalpel is not the right instrument to use, because when you start doing that, everyone is in a scramble to justify their position. I like the idea, it's borrowed from business, called zero-based budgeting. We're going to, across the board, roll back your budgets to zero, and then let you describe what it is you do and justify any type of budget increase or allocation to you, as for your value added to the university. People hate this kind of thing because for the same reason federal workers hate putting down the 5 things they did last week to as far as what are they getting paid for. Professors, staffers, anyone who works for a nonprofit hates this process because they claim that what they do is not quantifiable.
Yes,
in any,
right.
In any way.
It's neither
price on diversity.
Well, right. It's neither quantifiable nor describable. Fine, don't quantify it for me. Just describe it. I mean, the next email that should be sent from Doge is to every person with some sort of DEI designation, and I'm sure algorithmically you can contemplate all of the various iterations of DEI titles within these agencies or bureaucracies. But send an email out to just describe what you do in 1,000 words or less. Describe what you do.
Yeah, I think a good way of doing that would be to say, describe what you do, and you can't use the words fostering, nurturing, coordinating, supporting.
Yeah, right.
All of these weasel words that don't really mean anything. And what I do during the day, I foster inclusiveness. That's what I do.
Yeah.
So you can't use those words, and you really strip the nonprofit types of any way of expressing what it is they actually do, which is basically push paper back and forth to each other, and then preen themselves on their moral high ground and talk about how they're committed to social justice.
Well, the other thing too is all of these identitarian departments, the women's studies and the African American studies and every other Latino studies, every other one down the line. I mean, by and large, they're not getting private funding to sustain these departments. This is all coming through taxpayer funding in one form or the other. And yeah, maybe this is a way to backdoor in some students who otherwise wouldn't get in to make your unofficial quotas. But the point here is to say it's not just the DEI bureaucracy. It's also these fraudulent studies programs that wouldn't exist in most universities if they weren't taxpayer funded.
Yeah, studies programs are another target of mine in my previous book, Brutal Minds, that we talked about, I think, a couple of years ago on your show. And the studies are basically anytime you see the word studies affixed to a particular quasi-discipline, you got a scam going there, okay? Yeah. This is a multidisciplinary effort to bring together essayists and navel-gazers to do essays and exchange their opinions with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I took a women's studies class at University of Iowa, and it was just
a government studies class.
Repulsive. It was women's studies.
Oh, women's
and it was
studies.
Just
yeah.
Watching people lose their minds, and the room smelled like hemp.
Any course where you have a drum circle on the syllabus is probably an indication that you're not going. It's not academically rigorous. Yeah.
There's just a lot of male bashing. That's what I found.
Go ahead. To get a turn to talk in the classroom, you have to pass the talking stick.
Yes. Yes.
Well, how did you know that, sir?
Yeah. And you have a day of rage where you go out and scream at trees in the forest. Right. But the other thing about this too, I mean, just to be constructive, because we believe in higher education, we believe in institutions of higher learning. You're an associate professor at one. Is to say, okay, so we're going to strip away some of this funding for politics, because that's what this is, and we're going to put it back into maybe restoring some semblance of integrity within the humanities, and maybe bringing in people that do want to teach Shakespeare, for example. We're going to sort of make Shakespeare cool again, just to use one example of reinfusing some of these disciplines with sort of the Western canons. Maybe there's an opportunity to do that simultaneously.
Yeah, I certainly think so. Let me interject here to say I'm no longer an associate professor. I'm a full clinical professor. I got promoted.
Oh, all
which
right.
I don't know how that happened.
Yes, apologies. Yeah,
Someone made a mistake. Yeah, no, I think there's a wonderful opportunity here to restore the humanities, to restore their disciplines, to not just deconstructing Shakespeare or trying to delegitimize the fact that he's a great writer, the greatest writer of the Western canon, but to actually study him for the richness of his plays, to discover what he found universal in the human condition. And I think that we're going to see a renaissance. I really do believe we'll see a renaissance in this type of literary investigation. If I could interject here, also that what we're talking about here is, and I called it the con game of DEI, and how are all these people able to operate this con game? And what do I mean by con game? Well, DEI, most people think they have their own definition. That it means, we're going to establish a level playing field. It's a fair shot for all. We're just going to teach about racism and slavery. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's none of those things. Absolutely not. It's a con game called virtuous victimhood. And it's run by these grifters who make a buck based on the idea that America is inherently racist, that it is irredeemably racist. It's constructed on something called white supremacy culture, and that all white people are racists, or oppressors, or exploiters. And they're villains. We're villains. And all persons of color are oppressed, exploited, are victims. And there is a virtue that is attached to this victimhood. That's the framework that these grifters operate off of. And they convince colleges and universities that this is true, and that the colleges are rampant with racism. And this may sound kind of illogical, rampant with racism, when Harvard law professor Randall Kennedy said campuses are the least racist places in America. And so I give the example at Princeton University in the summer of 2020. 300 staff and faculty signed a rampant racism letter accusing the university of rampant racism.
Wow.
Well, Connor Friedersdorf at The Atlantic said, okay, he contacted all the signatories of that letter and said, can you give me an example of overt racism that occurred at Princeton in the past 15 years? He got not one example. So this is the con game. They've convinced people, the administration, the public at large, that racism is rampant on the Princeton campus, and yet no one can offer a single example from the past 15 years of rampant racism.
Well, you're right. You got to justify your 112 DEI positions, right? I mean, that's the whole game. Stanley Ridgley, he's a full professor, I'll have you know, management, Drexel University. Also the author of the new book, DEI Exposed: How the Biggest Con of the Century Almost Toppled Higher Education. DEI Exposed, Stanley Ridgley. Stanley Ridgley, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Always my pleasure, Dan and Amy. You have a good day, okay?
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Who should control the future of artificial intelligence? Washington or Springfield? If you're interested in learning more about one of the most talked about current topics, mark your calendar for Saturday, March 15th to attend an insightful presentation on the Supreme Court